I know a lot of people would be asking me after Mass to explain our new painting that we have, so I figured rather than trying to do it over and over with people, if I can take a couple of minutes of your time just to explain our beautiful fresco here and the changes that we made here in the sanctuary. And first of all, the question might be, why did we do this in the first place? Part of it was practicality. Anybody who walked in church realized that our carpet needed to be replaced desperately and the walls needed to be repainted. So we got a committee together and we chose the tile for the floor and repainted the church, all the colors blending together. But at the same time, our Eucharistic revival is going on here in the United States. And the bishops of the entire United States have declared 3 years of reminding us of the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist for a very practical reason. Studies show that as much as 2/3 of church-going Catholics, not just people who call them Catholics, but Catholics who go to church every Sunday, do not believe in the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist, that what we just received at Mass is actually his body and blood, but they think it's only something that symbolizes Jesus. And that's frightening, because the Eucharist is the heart and core of our entire faith. Without the Eucharist, Christ's death and resurrection is nothing to us. And so the bishops decided we need to spend 3 years and trying to get all American Catholics to remember the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. And in the midst of all that, there were certain things that they suggested, and some of them build upon things that go way back to Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict XVI. After the 25th anniversary of the end of the Second Vatican Council, Pope John Paul II called a chance to look at everything that had happened there. And of course, many things happened in the church afterwards that were very much in keeping with what the council asked for. But there were many other abuses and things that came in that were completely contradictory to what the council had imagined and asked for. And so Pope John Paul II called for a look now after 25 years as to what's been happening since then, and let's retain what's good and change the things that have gone wrong since that time. And with his right-hand man, Cardinal Ratzinger, future Benedict XVI, they began something that became known as the Reform of the Reform, to try to bring back the dignity and the sacredness that was in many places completely lost in Mass. And one of the things that Pope Benedict mentioned as part of the problem was that he said, somehow, he says, when the Mass was offered in the old form, as those of you will remember the Mass before the Second Vatican Council, if you're old enough, that the priest stood with his back to the people and the Blessed Sacrament was at the wall, it was easy for the people to understand that the priest was leading the people with him as he was offering the sacrifice of Christ to the Father. He says, somehow, however, when the altar was turned around and the priest was facing the people, somehow the community, Pope Benedict said, turned in on itself. And he actually said that the community started worshiping itself. And everything at Mass seemed to be about the community, about us feeling good, getting something out of Mass and all the other things. And it was all about reaffirmation of the people. Not that there's anything wrong in any of that, but in many places, he says, the holy sacrifice of the Mass, are participating with Christ in his offering to the Father, was almost completely abandoned. And so he said we needed to do something to bring back the core of the Mass, that is, that we are here every Sunday to participate with Christ in the unbloody sacrifice of the Mass, where he offers himself to the Father again through the ministry of the priest for the salvation of all the people. And he realized that it was not going to work to try to say, let's turn the Mass back around again and put the altar against the wall. He knew that wouldn't happen. But he said he had a happy solution that could keep the Mass the way we celebrate it now and help remind people of the purpose of the Mass, what we're doing. And that was, he said, to suspend the crucifix over the altar. Because he said this way, as the priest is offering the bread and wine, the body and blood of Christ, they'll easily be able to see the priest working, cooperating with Christ as Christ offers himself to the Father again. And he recommended that that be done wherever possible in churches. And so that's what we did here. Of course, that means we would have a blank wall behind us, and obviously we needed some sort of a decoration on there and not a blank space. And in the spirit of the Eucharistic revival, I began thinking about something we needed to do to have something remind us always of the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist and what we are here celebrating Sunday after Sunday. And right away in my mind came the beautiful fresco by Raphael, the Disputation of the Blessed Sacrament, which dispute does not mean in our English words, disputing back and forth like debating, but the proper translation would be the discussion of the Blessed Sacrament. The original is today in the Vatican Museum. It was part of the Apostolic Palace when Raphael first painted it, and it was in the room called the Sala della Signatura, where the Pope would sign important documents. Today, it's part of the Vatican Museum, and if you go to the Vatican Museum, there are 4 different tours you can take. They all include the Sistine Chapel, but most of them also include a visit to the Raphael rooms. And I always say, make sure you see them. To see the original of this and its counterpart, the School of Athens, I sent home a flap note which talks more about the artistic connection between the famous School of Athens and this painting that he did, to help us remember the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. And I'm happy to say to you that when I first advertised that this was the painting we were going to have here, which, by the way, is real paint on canvas. It's real oil paint on canvas. It's not just a print. It's actually repainted, a perfect depiction of what Raphael did. And one of the deacons who was one of the chaplains over at Greenhaven Correctional Institute was so enamored with the idea that he said, we have to buy that for St. Denis. And so he bought it for us in memory of Father Edward Donovan, who had been the chaplain at many years at Greenhaven and also lived here for a while at St. Denis. And Father Donovan had given money in his will for the use of it, and his sister is still living. The deacon spoke to his sister, and she said she would love, that he would have loved if you bought this painting in his memory. So this beautiful painting is a gift to us from the Chapel of St. Paul at Greenhaven Correctional Institute. So it didn't cost us anything. It's a gift from them. So I'm grateful that we have this beautiful gift, but I'd like to explain a few things in it, and forgive me if it looks like we're in a classroom, but I have my handy-dandy laser pointer here that can help point out a few things. I apologize to those of you who are live streaming at home because the position of the camera, unfortunately the bottom of the cross directly covers Christ in that. So sorry that you can't see that at home, but the people here in church can. Those of you on this side, I apologize that some of you will not be able to see it, but if you'd like to come over to this side, feel free to do so if you'd like to see what I'm describing. But at any rate, of course, the key figure here is Christ, enthroned in glory in heaven. The Father above him, the Holy Spirit below him. To his right, our left, looking at him as the Blessed Mother, looking in adoration on Jesus. And then St. John the Baptist, looking away but pointing to Jesus, telling everybody, don't look to me, look to him. He must increase and I must decrease. Above the throne are seraphim, and the 6 seraphim here, and then throughout everything, all the different areas in the heavenly scene, angels and cherubs, over and over again, little faces that are hard to see until you get close to them, but the abundance of angels around the throne. Seated next on either side of the throne are 12 figures, 6 from the Old Testament, 6 from the New. St. Peter, then Adam, then St. John the Evangelist, King David, St. Lawrence, and then partially hidden back here is Mattathias Maccabees, one of the figures from the Old Testament, the Maccabean Revolt. On the other side is his brother Judas Maccabees, then St. Stephen, the first martyr, Moses with the 10 Commandments, St. James, the apostle, Abraham, and St. Paul. Below it is the church on earth. And of course you see the altar in the center and many figures around it. Not all of the figures are identified, and some of them are debated. But ones we know for sure exactly whom Raphael meant. First of all, we have the 4 great doctors of the Latin Church. St. Gregory the Great, St. Jerome, St. Ambrose, and his student St. Augustine, who in turn is instructing one of his students in the faith. We have on the right Dante, Pope Sixtus IV, who was the Pope who commissioned the painting of the Sistine Chapel, which bears his name, St. Bonaventure, St. Thomas Aquinas, Blessed Duns Scotus. On the right, way over in the corner here, is Frangelico, who was one of the earliest painters of the Renaissance, and Bramante, one of the principal architects that built the new St. Peter's Basilica. Then the 2 most important figures down below are these 2 here. This is St. Augustine of Antioch, St. Ignatius of Antioch, and St. Justin the Martyr. Ignatius of Antioch, in about the year 110, was the first to coin the phrase the Eucharist. and he's pointing to the host in the monstrance on top of the altar. And then on the other side, St. Justin the Martyr motioning up to Christ. And the significance is, you'll notice a lot of books here, a lot of people studying and discussing the significance of the Eucharist. Ignatius is saying, if you want to know truth, you want to know reality, which is parallel to the painting of the School of Athens, which is across the wall from it in that room. Just look to the Eucharist. The Eucharist is the key. And Justin says the Eucharist brings us to the Lord. Notice there's a big chasm in between heaven and earth. And that chasm is breached by the Eucharist. The Eucharist is the bridge between heaven and earth. So in receiving Jesus in the Eucharist, our lives on earth are brought to his throne in heaven. And incidentally, over here on this side, you see a church building being constructed, reminding us that the church is continuing to grow. So the beauty of this painting is that hopefully it will remind us every time we come to church that here on earth, as we participate at the sacrifice of the altar, it is leading us, as we receive the Eucharist, to participate with Christ in his suffering and death on the cross as he presents himself to the Father once again in that sacrifice. And that at this altar we are receiving a foretaste of the Paschal Feast of Heaven. That's what Raphael intended by that, and that's, I hope, what we also will take with it ourselves as we look at this painting Sunday after Sunday. So thank you for your patience.